Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you to the choir. All right, just for that, I'm going to stand over here so you can see me better. Okay. So I grew up picturing God as a big man with a white beard, and I still pretty much do. I can't help it. I know the church has made an effort to remove the more male pronouns, and I know in my mind that God is so much more than a father. God has all the characteristics that we also think about in the ultimate mother: love, forgiveness, compassion. And that's why today, on Mother's Day, I'm going to talk about compassion and how you can experience God's compassion through cultivating it in yourself. I never understood, keep on that, thank you. I never understood how God could forgive me for everything. If God could see my innermost thoughts, feelings, and urges, even the very unflattering ones, how could God really love me for me? It wasn't until I read Kristen Neff's Self-Compassion that I really started to understand what compassion meant and started to understand God's compassion. So the definition of self-compassion is the same as for regular compassion. First, you must notice that suffering is happening. Then your heart responds to the pain by wanting to do something to make it better. And then you acknowledge that suffering is part of the shared human experience. So here's what it's not. It's not self-pity, because self-pity is very egocentric. It's like, my problems are worse than everybody else's, and that's not what it is. It's not self-indulgence, like, what are you getting you this Christmas? And it's not self-esteem, because self-esteem is based on social comparison. Like, if I think that I'm more attractive, athletic, or intelligent, then I'll have high self-esteem, but if I don't, then I won't. Self-compassion isn't based on that. Everyone is deserving of compassion because they are a being that experiences suffering. So there are 3 core components, and I'm going to talk about each of them: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So we've all heard the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But nowhere in there is the message, but go ahead and be a jerk to yourself. If we try to be kind to people, animals, and the planet as God's creation, but then we're harsh with ourselves, we're setting ourselves apart from the rest of creation. And that's simply false. You are a part of it. So why is it so easy to be kind to others and so hard to do it to ourselves? A lot of us say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to our worst enemy. And why do I have to call my mom when I'm sick to hear her say it's okay to stay home from work? Why can't I just make that decision for myself? Every time I turn the paper is not when the slide goes, so you can go back to self-kind. Yeah, there you go. I'll make a signal. So self-kindness is not a cultural value. The thought of stopping to comfort ourselves probably sounds weird. We get the message that strong individuals should be stoic and silent about our own suffering. But self-kindness is actually a really powerful tool to deal with life's difficulties. So how do we do this? We've all heard of fight or flight, but there's also another mammalian system called tend and befriend. It's an attachment system, and it allows us to have strong emotional bonds between caregivers and their young so that the caregivers won't abandon their children and the children won't wander off alone. So when we soothe our own pain, we're tapping into that mammalian caregiving system, and we're releasing oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. And I think the fact that we have this built-in mechanism for that is evidence that God has created us to have a loving nature with both ourselves and each other. So how do we do this? First, we notice when we're being self-critical. Then we make an active effort to soften that critical voice, and then we reframe that critical observation in a more kind, friendly way. So I might say something like, honey, I know you ate that box of cookies because you wanted to cheer yourself up, but now you actually feel worse about your body. So I really want you to be happy, so why don't you go for a long walk so that you can feel better? So see how that's not self-indulgence? Even the kindest, most compassionate mother wouldn't just let her child stay home from school and eat junk food all day. Studies actually show that more compassionate, self-compassionate people make better health decisions because they care about their long-term well-being. So, the shared human experience, this is my favorite one. In university, I took a course called Religions of the East. And during the Buddhism class, my professor turned and made the pronouncement, "Life is suffering." And we all stared at him blankly. And he said, "Yeah, I always get that reaction from my undergrads, but I also teach this class to older adults. And when I tell them life is suffering, they all look at me like, yeah, what's your point?" The Bible talks about suffering in life as well. The Revelations passage that was read today talked about how God would relieve hunger, thirst, and scorching heat that we experience in life. It almost sounds like they're talking about heaven here, but this passage is likely allegory for the potential to make earth as it is in heaven. We are called to co-create the reign of God right here, right now, through each loving act. And this is all good stuff. But the fact is, we are suffering in the here and now, and we need a way to cope with this while we try our best to make the world a better place. Maybe God can relieve our hunger, thirst, and scorching heat through helping us learn self-compassion. Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about one of my times of suffering. This is a picture from August 2015, and I look pretty happy here with a new puppy. But the reason we have this dog is because we had been experiencing 2.5 years of fertility issues, and I worried that I would never have children, and it was the most important thing in the world to me. All my life, things had just worked out like they were supposed to if I did what I was supposed to do. I worked hard and got into the schools that I wanted. I applied for scholarships and got funding for my master's program. I applied for a job here in Kincardine and got the first one I applied to. But this time, my success was completely out of my control. Facebook mocked me daily with pictures of other people's cute babies and pregnancy announcements. But the worst part was when my friends told me they were pregnant. I felt I should be happy for them, but I really wasn't. I was extremely jealous, and each new pregnancy felt like a slap in the face. I knew my sister was trying for a baby too. I was sure that I would be happy for her when it happened, but I wasn't. To my chagrin, I was even more devastated than when other people less close to me told me they were pregnant. I managed to sound happy on the phone while silent tears ran down my face, and then I quickly got off the phone. Later, I sent her an email saying that I couldn't talk about it with her for a while. How horrible was I for my inability to feel happy for one of the people I love most in the world? Shame and guilt made me feel like a failure as a person, as a friend, and as a sister. I felt so alone. We often feel alone when we fail. We feel we are unworthy, and that leads us to feel lonely and isolated. But if we closely examine our personal failings, it soon becomes clear that they're not there by choice. If we had control over our maladaptive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, we wouldn't have them anymore. Before you play the blame game, think about all the things you didn't choose: your genes, how you were raised in your family, the society you were born into. This realization helps us have compassion for the fact that we are doing our best with the cards that we've been dealt. Even Jesus had negative feelings and likely regrets. He was human too. He didn't just go around with the blissful smile and halo that we're used to seeing in paintings. In the passage we read today, he seemed annoyed at the people who wanted him to state more clearly that he was the Messiah when he thought it was pretty obvious to anyone who was paying attention. But there are so many more good examples if you really think about the stories that we've all grown up with. At age 12, Mary scolded Jesus for his thoughtlessness when, on a pilgrimage, he stayed behind to debate theology with the temple scholars, and his parents unknowingly left without him, and then had to spend days looking for him. I lost Robin in Shoppers for a whole minute when she decided to play surprise hide and seek with me, and it was really scary. I can't even imagine what his parents went through. And then when they found him, Jesus responded, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" Do you think there might have been a little teenage attitude in that intonation? And the passage continues, "But they did not understand what he was saying to them." Well, Jesus was not the first or the last teenager to be misunderstood by their parents. At the beginning of Jesus' public ministry in Jerusalem, Jesus thought the temple animal sellers and money changers were taking advantage of people. And he went in and overturned their tables and drove out the sheep and cattle, yelling that they were making a house of prayer into a den of robbers. Well, that certainly made a statement. But this is how the temple funded most of its income. That would be like coming in here and throwing around our collection plates and accusing us of being thieves and liars. Sometimes I wonder, did Jesus think back later and think maybe there was a gentler, kinder way to make that statement? I don't know. And then there was the time he was tempted by the devil. And the story just talks about his snappy comebacks when the devil tempted him with hunger, power, and the temptation to control the world by divine intervention. But I'm sure Jesus felt real temptation during these tests. It wouldn't be a very compelling story if he didn't. Yeah, that's the one. I read another book, a lot like the self-compassion book, called Radical Acceptance. And this book talks about the Buddhist teachings around self-compassion. And Buddhism has a similar story of temptation. Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree after becoming enlightened and discovering the middle path. And the middle path involves neither striving toward nor pulling away from any experience. And during this time, the god Mara, representing the dark side of human nature, came to Buddha and tested him. He came as a violent storm, seductive women, a massive army, and a clawed-fanged beast. Of course, Buddha had emotional responses to each form Mara took, but still he sat under the tree with an open, tender heart, neither grasping at nor shying away from his experiences. I think this gives us a little insight into what Jesus may have felt, giving himself compassion for his normal human feelings, but still not acting on them. So you can see that even the holiest of humans, we're also human. The emotion of compassion springs from the recognition that the human experience is imperfect. Self-compassion honors the fact that humans are fallible, and we make wrong choices, and we have feelings of regret. When we are in touch with our common humanity, we remember that feelings of inadequacy and disappointment are shared by all. In fact, after I Googled, "Everyone is pregnant but me," it turned out to be a very popular topic. I just want to add the caveat that this doesn't mean we should let ourselves off the hook for everything. We can still use what we call discriminating wisdom to recognize when things are harmful or unjust and seek to change things. Next slide. Oh, mindfulness, yes. So we've already covered self-kindness and the shared human experience. So the third one is mindfulness. When you look in the mirror and decide, "Oh, my stomach is a little big and my wrinkles really show in this light," do you immediately say to yourself, "Wow, these feelings of inadequacy are painful and deserving of a kind, caring response"? Probably not. Even when the experience is totally not your fault, like someone you care about getting sick, most people go straight to problem-solving mode, making doctor's appointments, setting up services, and of course, it's important to deal with the crisis, but it also drains us emotionally, and we need to stop and acknowledge that we're having a hard time, and this is deserving of a kind, caring response. Otherwise, our suffering will go unattended, and we may burn out from the stress and worry. On the other hand, we don't want to get carried away with how angry and upset we are either. Take another Buddhist story. Even after Buddha became revered throughout India, Mara would stop in unexpectedly. Instead of ignoring Mara or driving him away, Buddha would say, "I see you, Mara," and would invite him for tea as an honored guest. Mara would stay for a while and then leave again. When we learn mindfulness, and I'm not a mindfulness expert, we are supposed to make a soft mental note of our state without judging it. Some say that suffering is created by resistance to pain rather than the pain itself. So if you imagine that you're stuck in a traffic jam, this is not a nice experience for any of us. And I grew up in Toronto, so I've been there. If you resist the experience by shouting, "This should not be happening," and again, I've done this more than once, then you will suffer a great deal more. Wishing for things to be other than they are creates suffering. Since my first experience with the pain of infertility, I've become much more of an expert at dealing with pain and negative emotions, having had to deal with the grief of losing my son, Jake. At the start, I railed against the universe for being such an imperfect place that I could experience so much pain. I felt guilty for moments of happiness that I could feel happy without Jake. But I have since learned that both negative and positive emotions happen, and both are temporary. Most of the time, I no longer judge myself for how I'm feeling in any given moment. I no longer feel guilty for experiencing joy when I should feel sadness, or sadness when I should feel joy for someone or myself. How I feel is how I feel. When I don't resist the pain, I don't add extra negative feelings to it. I'm not afraid of grief. I do not attempt to rate my overall life satisfaction. I just appreciate the good times and feel the bad ones as well. So there's a prayer that the Alcoholics Anonymous use that I think fits very nicely here. And we can say it together. Ready? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Next one. And there's a nice mantra in the self-compassion book that I think can be a prayer as well. And I use this sometimes in moments of suffering to help me remember all the parts that I should. And it goes, "This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need." So, as a result of self-compassion, we can feel inadequate and also connected. We can feel sadness and tender concern. And we can feel frightened, but also comforted by our own kindness and caring. So, next slide. So how can being self-compassionate help you be a better Christian? So people who have more self-compassion are shown to be less anxious and depressed, things that can stop us from going out into the world and doing good. They also tend to have more emotional intelligence because they're used to managing their own emotions. And they tend to have better friendships. They're more willing to admit their mistakes to their friends and be compassionate about their friends' mistakes, and more likely to focus on helping and encouraging their friends. And even in their romantic relationships, their romantic partners say that they're more accepting, less judgmental. They consider their partner's point of view more. They're described as more caring, connected, affectionate, and more likely to encourage their partner to follow their own goals. And I think this last one is a really big one for anyone who's doing a lot of helping. And this is that they're more likely to experience compassion satisfaction instead of compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is the emotional burnout you have from absorbing other people's traumas. Gord, pay attention to this part. And compassion satisfaction is when you feel energized, happy, and grateful to be able to make a difference. So I want to come back to the golden rule and expand a little bit on it. When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he said, "Love God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." So this means that if we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, we need to first actually love ourselves properly. And I think we can see from the research that people who do have compassionate love for themselves are better at having compassionate love for others as well. So how are we supposed to feel lovable enough to really believe it spiritually, unworthy as we seem to be of God's love or our own? Consider a quote from the lion Aslan in the Narnia books. Aslan, who has always been viewed as the Jesus character, says to the children, "You come of the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve, and that is both honor enough to erect the head of the poorest beggar and shame enough to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor on earth. Be content." That speaks again to the pride and shame of being human and that it's okay. Jesus said, "Love one another as I have loved you," which claims through Jesus that we are loved and we are worthy of love because God loved us first. When we know what compassion for ourselves feels like, we can better call to mind the compassion that God must feel for us. I wanted to read you a quote from a friend of mine who had a near-death experience and got to actually experience God's love and compassion firsthand. "God, I remember, this all-encompassing light, vibrating love and kindness and truth and understanding, called me by my name, my real name, a name he only gave me, his very own creation, and nobody else shares this same name, and only God can pronounce it. And when he does, it vibrates pure love. When he called me by my name, I felt he knew me deeper and better than I ever knew or understood myself. I became transparent in his presence, like a clear light bulb with a colorful core that reflects its hues on its surface, similar to a soap bubble. To be known by God is not scary. It is a feeling of belonging. It is pure bliss." God knows and loves you like this, all your heart, all your mind, with all your strengths and weaknesses. God loves you as yourself. Think back to the passage from John today. "My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Few of us are familiar with what it is to be a shepherd anymore, but we know about mothers. You belong to God. Let God mother you. Happy Mother's Day.